Chapter 33, The Liar. Tress found the captain on the top deck, leaning against the rail at the bow of the ship as she poured water from her canteen into a nice tin cup and gazed toward the setting sun that seared the horizon. Tress stepped up, and at that moment, the sea stopped. Doug, the night helmsman, called for the furling of the sails, and the ship scraped to a halt. It was a quiet beast, slumbering to the gentle sounds of wind on spore and canvas. Each time the ship stopped, the world felt suddenly out of step with its own music. There was no motion to compensate for, and the air was too quiet. The gentle grinding of spores was normally so constant that its lack became unnatural. Even the deck grew quiet as the Dougs went below to grab a snack and play cards until the seethe returned. The captain didn't acknowledge Tress. She drank the water from her cup, then dangled it from her index finger, staring toward the sun, as if she were a celestial executioner sent to make certain the day rightly expired. Tress didn't speak up immediately. The captain had made it clear she wasn't to be interrupted when enjoying a drink. Tress just hoped the woman wouldn't toss the cup into the ocean when she was done. Yes, it was utilitarian in design, but so was Tress herself. She'd hate to have either be wasted. The verdant moon watched overhead, covering a good third of the sky. I've often found it odd how little the people of the spore seas look at their moons. When I first arrived on the planet, I couldn't help staring. There is a malevolence in the way they hover so close. Where most planetary moons stick to the walls and wait for an invitation to dance, these are already on the floor and they're already wearing sequins. Why are you here, Tress? Crow finally asked. Tress deliberated. If she was outright asked Crow to go to the Crimson Sea, the woman would undoubtedly be suspicious. Well, Tress said, I wanted to discuss something. That's not what I meant, Crow said. I want to know why you're here on these oceans. What do you want? As if that were a simple question to answer. People generally don't know what they want, though they almost uniformly hate being told what it should be. Plus, Tress had lived her entire life feeling she shouldn't ask for the things she wanted. I left my island to see the world, she said. People often say that about becoming a sailor, Crow said. It's a pretty little aphorism, isn't it? But the dainty bow, travel the seas, see 100 different islands. Problem is, each dockside bar is frighteningly similar, and that's basically all you're going to see. At least I'll get to meet a lot of different people. Well, yes, she noted, that is true. Problem is, their insides also look frighteningly similar. And as a dead runner, that's basically all you're going to see of them. Tress glanced away from Crow. She wished the ship would move again. All this standing still made her nauseous. So that's it, Crow said. Just some childish desire to be someplace else? Yes, Tress said. The captain seemed disappointed. In the distance, the sun finally sank into the sea, fully extinguished. Only the afterglow persisted to give evidence of the crime. It bothered Tress how much she'd had to lie lately. Certainly one shouldn't feel bad about lying to someone like Crow. One shouldn't hit people either, but such social conventions don't apply to the tiger gnawing on your leg. So Tress wasn't worried about this lie. She was more concerned about the general density of lies emerging from her. They were all for a greater good, yes, but the aforementioned tiger might also believe that said gnawing was for the greater good, specifically its good. Tress was coming to realize a discomforting fact. People are not separated into simple groups of liars and non-liars. It's often the situation and one's upbringing or genetics that make the lies and therefore the liars. Actually, Tress found herself saying, there is more. Someone I love was taken by the sorceress. I intend to travel to her island and confront her and get him back. Crow nearly dropped the cup. Tress reached out anxious. The Midnight Sea, Crow said. You intend to travel to the Midnight Sea? Well, hopefully not alone, Tress said. Ideally, I'd like to do it in a ship. Crow laughed, and it was not a cheerful sound. antagonistic and mocking. It was too ordinary laughter, what a guard dog is to a puppy. You, Crow repeated, a straggly-haired washer girl from nowhere. You're going. I can't even say it. Something in Tress changed at that sound. It didn't quite snap, but it certainly bent, and found that it was to flex far more than it had in the past. She looked Crow in the eye and said, I don't think that's fair. I've gotten this far. My mother always told me that the hardest part of any task is getting yourself to start it. As someone who has climbed several mountains, Crow said, I can confidently say your mother is an idiot. Tress felt herself flush with anger. Some things were uncalled for, even among pirates. Who, Crow said, did you think would take you on this impossible mission? Well, Tress said, I only really know the crew of one ship right now, and I was kind of hoping. She was interrupted by another bout of laughter. She had expected this one. She'd provoked it on purpose because she was growing less and less embarrassed about lying, at least to Crow. And she had just thought of quite the majestic one. What if I found a way to pay you? Tress said. Crow laughed so hard she started coughing. Ulam even came up with and peeked about the deck at the sound, as the sole previous time he'd heard Crow laugh like that was when one of the sailors had managed to spear himself in the crotch with his own boarding hook. Even if I wanted to go to the Midnight Sea, Crow said, wiping her eyes, and even if you could pay me, the crew would never agree to it. You're probably right, Tress said, pretending to think. I'd have to ease them into it, send them someplace menacing but less dangerous at first. What about the Crimson Sea? I'd need to cross the Crimson Sea to get to the Midnight Sea. Anyway, so we could go there first. They'd never agreed to it, girl, Crow said. This crew is as cowardly as the king himself. But say I could get them to agree, Tress said. Would you allow it? Very few ships sail the Crimson, so the ones that do must be the richest and most valuable to loot. That, it should be noted, made about as much sense as assuming people who live in distant kingdoms must be the most fit, since it takes so long to walk to those places. Crow shrugged. If you can persuade them, fine, but they will not agree. And not yet, because they're not desperate enough. Tress thanked the captain and excused herself. She didn't want to say anything more and didn't need to, because the captain had effectively just been played by a straggly-haired washer girl from nowhere. Again. Chapter 34. Chapter 34. The Tosher. There's a story from Tress's land that I'm quite fond of telling. You see, in the palace of the king, the lowliest servant is the Tosher, the man who goes through the castle's sewage and makes certain nothing useful has been lost or discarded. No one wanted to be the Tosher for obvious odoriferous reasons. Worse, no one listened to the Tosher because wherever he went, people were either too busy moving upwind from him or too preoccupied by trying to remember how to get vomit out of carpet, soap, vinegar, and warm water. The Tosher in our story had a great many items to complain about, some related to the lack of fiber on the royal diet. One thing he didn't complain about was his dinner. Each day he got the same thing, a baked potato with lard. The Tosher loved baked potatoes, so much so that he decided to begin asking for a second one at dinner. He was given it, mostly to get him to go away, and then it became a habit, 2 potatoes each day. This continued until the lesser servants were instead served something different for dinner, cornbread with lard, and the Tosher hated cornbread. He waited for the potatoes to return, but they never did. One day, while doing his daily work after remarking that someone must have dyed the punch green again at the latest ball, the thought occurred to him. His life in this palace was miserable, but surely he could do something to better his station. He determined to speak to the cook and get potatoes for dinner again. So the Tosher set out on a quest. He found the cook, apologized for making the milk curdle, and made his plea. Potatoes, please, less cornbread. The cook was sympathetic, judging by the tears in her eyes, but unfortunately, she couldn't change the menu. She explained that the palace butler set the meal plan. The cook simply made the food. Natasha went on to talk to the butler. He found the man in the middle of a strange activity, trying to see how much handkerchief his nostrils could hold. Natasha presented his problem. The butler seemed sympathetic, judging by the way he was biting his lip. Sadly, he couldn't change the meal plan because he was allocated supplies by the Minister of Trade, who no longer provided potatoes. Well, the Minister of Trade, it turns out, had dropped her ring into the Tasha's domain. The Tasha recovered it after some diligent searching, though he did wonder why someone as fancy as the Minister of Trade ate so much corn. He went to return the ring, and the minister honored the Tasha by seeing him in person. Outside in high winds while it was raining during allergy season. The Tasha explained his predicament. The Minister of Trade was sympathetic, judging by the way she almost fainted as he approached, and she'd listened to his complaint. However, she could not help him. The king himself had mandated that only corn be fed to the servants. Well, the king wasn't the sort of person you could meet every day because he wasn't a regular, and it was an every second day thing for him. On the proper day, the Tosher, umbrella in hand, called up. He knew the king would be able to hear, as the Tosher had first-hand empirical evidence of how good the acoustics were in that particular location. He asked the king if he would please give them potatoes for dinner again. He loved them so much he always ate two. The king was sympathetic, judging by how he stopped giving the Tosher new work for a short time in order to answer. I can't, said the king. The entire potato crop succumbed to pests. Also, look out! The Tosher learned two important lessons that day. First, you don't need to lower your umbrella to talk to someone. And second, no one, not even the king, had the power to provide potatoes at the moment. You're the one, the king said after doing his business, who started the two potatoes thing, eh? Yes, the Tosher called up, then regretted opening his mouth. Funny, the king explained, his voice echoing. I had to stop buying potatoes even before the crop died. Once you took to, everyone wanted to. Because of the increased demand, potatoes became too expensive. We stopped being able to afford them for the servants. So in truth, there was a third lesson. Even small actions have consequences. And while we can often choose our actions, we rarely get to choose our consequences. As Tress walked below decks, she felt a certain discomfort. It was a common occurrence. Conversations with Captain Crow tended to leave a person with residual filth, emotional soap scum. As Tress saw Ulam walking away, disappointed that the laughter hadn't been due to any impaled crotches, she hastened after him. Doctor, she said, there's something I wanted to ask you about the spores. I most certainly did not try. Hush, he said, looking down the corridor. He ushered her toward her room. Once inside, he inspected her closely. Yes, I believe you're still alive. I mean, I'm talking to you and walking around. That's not as concrete a set of evidences as you might assume. He said, but what was it you wanted to ask me? Do midnight spores leave any kind of trace after the bond is broken, she asked? Like, say, you were using them to sneak into someplace you shouldn't be. That's generally where people sneak, hmm? Right, but let's say that you were interrupted and someone broke the spell for you so you didn't die. It's not a spell, but a complex symbiotic relationship between two entities. Either way, I'd buy the person who saved you a very nice present, perhaps a spare shoulder. People can always use more shoulders, despite people's promising me cold ones as gifts on 3 separate occasions, they've never come through. Humans can be so inscrutable. Right. Back on topic, please. Ulam smiled, fingers laced before him. Strange how gray skin and red eyes could seem so quaint once you got to know him. Less demonic, more eccentric. You won't be discovered, he said, unless someone actively saw the midnight essence moving about while you were controlling it. Once the bond breaks, it evaporates. into black smoke, which disperses quickly. No residue is left behind. Tress nodded, relieved. Why are you so anxious about this? Ulam asked. Well, I just had a conversation with the captain, Tress said. I feel like I got the better of her, and so you wisely assume maybe instead she was secretly manipulating you? Perhaps because she had a clue as to what you were doing? Curious. Tell me, what did you get her to do? Sail us to the Crimson Sea, Tress said. I know what you're going to say, but I also talked to Fort, Saleh, and Anne. They're willing to sail the Crimson too, and they think they can make the Dugs agree. I don't doubt they can, Ulam said. The three of them can be very persuasive, but why are we sailing the Crimson? What in the world could make you want that to happen? Oh, Tress said, right. Well, that's what I found out when I was spying on the captain. She plans to visit a dragon and make him heal her. Ah, Zysis, Ulam said. She plans to bargain with Zysis. Yes, so I persuaded her to sail the Crimson. Something she already wanted to do. Well, yes, technically. It's more that I persuaded her without her knowing I was persuading her to again do something she wanted to do. It's complicated, but I worry maybe I'm not as clever as I might have thought I was. That seems self-evident, child, Ulam said. Well, she said, sitting down on her bed. Wasn't it at least a little clever? The captain was going to sink at least one more ship, so getting everyone to go now instead, everyone wins, right? Assuming we can find the dragon, the captain will get healed. No more ships need be sunk. Maybe once she's no longer dying, Crow will let everyone go, and well, she wouldn't be on the Crimson Sea, remarkably, halfway to the Midnight Sea. That would put her closer to rescuing Charlie than she had realistically thought she would get. Child, Ulam said, going to one knee beside the bed. Zysis is a dragon. He doesn't offer boons, he offers trades. For what? Treasure? You mean we have to rob more ships first? Zysis has no need for lucre, Tress. He wants for only one thing in order to continue his experiments: servants to do his chores. But seeing as he lives underneath the spores, he requires a very particular kind of servant. Particular in what way? Tress asked. They can't be afraid of spores, Ulam said. That is always the trade. One reasonable boon for a healing would count, I suppose, in exchange for one slave to work for him all their days. The trick is finding him an offering who doesn't panic at being led through a tunnel of spores. In that awful moment, Tress remembered the captain's eyes when Tress had decided to remain on the ship, when she'd volunteered to become the ship's sprouter. You really aren't afraid of spores, girl? Crow asked. Oh, moons, Tress thought. Outside, the seas started again. The ship lurched into motion a short time later, and she heard the captain calling new orders. They would head to a port and take on extra stores, since they would be very soon going on a long journey without ports. Crow was planning to trade Tress to the dragon, and Tress, in her ignorance, had greatly accelerated the ship toward the event. Wait, she might have tricked Crow, but she'd managed to trick herself as well. She would have no proverbial potatoes, but she certainly was standing in a big pile of the Tosher's soil. And that's the end of chapter 34.